Far below us, and in fact all around us, is Kakadu National Park, one of Australia's 5 World Heritage properties.
It really is a huge place, and it's kept alive by the monsoon rains which fall down there on the floodplain, and some of which held up here in the catchment area to fall way, way down as waterfalls like this one at Jim Jim.
Yeah, either way, it's the water that allows life to flourish here at Kakadu.
Animal, vegetable, mineral, cannibal, catch it on Earthwatch!
Hi, and welcome to Earthwatch.
Hi.
We're in a very strange and mysterious part of Australia today. We're on the East Alligator River. Very scary place. It's in Kakadu National Park, and we have a very, very special program for you today.
At the moment we're on our way to have a look at a really different sort of art gallery. But David, you were out there sizing up the buffalo before, weren't you?
Yes, and what a size they were. And you braved leeches and mosquitoes and heat and humidity, all to bring us a story on the dreaded weed mimosa.
I don't want to talk about it. It was terrible. And that was while you were swimming around in the pool with those turtles with the snuzzles.
The pig-nosed turtles. They were just so wonderful.
First up, we'll see some of the oldest paintings in Australia, and on the way we get a boat's eye view of Kakadu's changing landscapes, the floodplains, paperbark forests, and the magnificent sandstone escarpment. In the meantime, we're just hoping those storm clouds stay well behind us, because this is the wet season, and when it rains, it comes down in bucketfuls.
Yeah, if we look around us here, we can see that it's obviously very lush and moist. It's a rich, moist jungle, very, very humid zone, typical of what you'd find in a monsoonal area.
Has it always been like that?
It hasn't actually, no. A long time ago, back in what the Aborigines would call the dream time, Australia wasn't where it is on Earth today. It was much further south, attached to the Antarctic. Then about 50 million years ago, just like a huge raft, Australia broke free from the Antarctic and kind of drifted northwards like this big raft, nudging its way up towards Asia. Well, once the leading edge nudged into the tropics, that part of Australia that we now call the top end experienced for the first time in its history a monsoonal seasonal cycle of 2 seasons. We have heavy, heavy rains in the summer and then no rain at all in the winter. So there's a wet season and a dry season.
And it's hot all the time.
Yes, and we're obviously here in the wet season right now because it's so hot and so sweaty.
And one of the best things is the nightly lightning display.
David, those are the really obvious differences, but if you lived here, you'd become aware of more subtle changes. In fact, the Aborigines, who lived here for tens of thousands of years, believed there were 6 seasons, and they moved around constantly, looking for the most comfortable place to be and the best hunting according to the seasons.
Greg Miles, one of the Kakadu rangers, is giving us a guided tour.
So, Greg, this is the floodplain. How important is it to the Aborigines?
Well, the floodplains are very important, not so much in the wet season when it's very wet underfoot, but during the dry season, much of the animal life concentrates onto the floodplains to take advantage of the water. And there's a whole range of edible plants and animals out there which people can utilise each dry season.
So it's a bit like a giant supermarket?
Yeah, you could say that, certainly. You don't have to pay though, you have to work for it.
You have to work for it.
Indeed, in the heat.
At this time of year, the floodplains are covered in water lilies, which make excellent food. And below the lilies, the water's swimming with more food. There are turtles and barramundi and crocodiles and file snakes. This young file snake will make great tucker when it's fully grown, as do the countless birds, and even the odd goanna. Over a third of all Australia's bird species make their way to Kakadu. Many of them come halfway round the world to these fantastic wetlands. Paperbark forests grow around the fringes of the floodplain.
So, Greg, how do they use the paperbark country?
Well, in the dry season, when you can walk in around amongst the paperbarks and the ground's dry, if you need water, there are some trees which have a certain lump on their trunk, and if you know what you're looking for, you can cut into that lump with an axe and fresh water will run out. You can collect it.
What else did they do?
You can strip the bark itself off in big slabs and stack them one on top of the other, shove sticks through to hold them into a mat and float them on the water. And if you're any good, you can stand on that and pole yourself out across the swamps to get to goose nests and things like that. The kids love it, you know, it's good things to play on.
Beyond the paperbarks, we find ourselves in the dark and eerie monsoon jungle.
Did the Aborigines go in there?
They, for the most part, preferred not to go in there too much because these dark, eerie places really are the place of spirits and there could be bad things lurking in there. But they used to harvest a lot of fruits and vegetables around the outside, around the fringe of the forest.
It's a lovely place, isn't it? Nice and cool.
Get out here and walk through the rocks. Tie it to that tree there.
So this is all sandstone country, Greg?
Yes, this is where the paintings start.
Good. What's that?
That's a crocodile calling. You don't hear that very often.
Big crocodile?
Well, it's breeding. That's a breeding-sized crocodile. Very rare to hear that. It only occurs in the wet season occasionally when they think they're being intruded upon.
Would it be dangerous?
Well, if you went too close to the billabong, we're not going that way.
No, can we go around it?
Yes,
All right, so where do we go? Over here?
this way.
Wow, that sun is hot out there.
Lovely and cool.
Yeah, I'll tell you what. I might have to stay here for a while and take lots of pictures, I think.
Oh, it's stunning, isn't it?
Yeah. Whew. Great place to be, out of the sun.
It's lovely.
Yeah.
You can see why the Aborigines came here, of course, in the wet, when it was really wet and sticky.
Yeah.
But it was cool up here.
Obvious place to come, isn't
That's right, as well as being dry.
Beautiful.
And of course, they've got this lovely sandstone up here to draw on
Yeah.
and paint.
And they're beautiful paintings too.
Greg, why are there so many really healthy-looking fish up there?
The diet here, generally speaking, was very lean, and so they like fat food with lots of, juicy fat to put on the fire and to eat. So you paint a fat fish, or a fat turtle, or goanna, or whatever. That way you attempt to guarantee the increase of fat animals. And the paintings usually show the fat lobes, they're emphasised in a bright colour to indicate again this increase. If you want more pig-nosed turtles, then you bring out the fat lobes in them in the painting.
So what sort of age are we looking at for the paintings here?
Some of these would have been done perhaps in the last 50, 60 years. But others, in other spots in this same gallery, could be 15, 20,000 years old.
Well, we're a long way from Tasmania, but this is a Tasmanian tiger, or thylacine. And thylacines are believed to have become extinct on the mainland about 5,000 years ago when dingoes were introduced. So, from information like that, we can get a rough idea of how old these rock paintings are.
Unfortunately, torrential rain over thousands of wet seasons has washed part of it away. Rangers like Jonathan Nudgy are stopping further damage by putting up silicon drip lines. When the water hits the line, it drips straight off rather than running down the wall and over the paintings.
Looks a bit like chewing gum, doesn't it?
Yeah.
How important is it to save the rock paintings?
Oh, it's very important to me because of the art and that, so we could tell stories to tourists and even our children.
The Aborigines were really keen observers of the environment around them, and a lot of the time they drew what they saw, like this little archerfish here, which was a very common fish around these parts. And he had upward-facing jaws, so he could eat things off the surface, and was also able to blow a jet of water at things above the surface. And this particular one is blowing a jet stream up at this spider, knocking the spider out of his web or his perch, and he'll come along and eat him up. There's stories like that all over this place. Like this one about a recent immigrant to the park that's overstayed its welcome. Here's David.
Well, I'm standing here behind the bar at the Humpty-Doo pub just out of Darwin, and these horns on the wall here are pretty impressive. They must have belonged to a truly impressive beast. They're more than 2 metres across, and the owner would have weighed in at more than 1,200 kilograms, which is quite a sizable creature. These are in fact the horns of Boobalus boobalus, the water buffalo. Water buffalo are not native to Australia. They were introduced by the early settlers to haul loads and provide milk and meat. When the settlements were deserted in the 1840s, the buffalo were left behind to run wild. Here in the top end, the climatic conditions are ideal for water buffalo, and they bred very successfully. Buffalo lived in family groups of 50 to 250 animals, travelling on their underwater highways or swim tracks, munching their way through up to 33 kilograms of grass a day. Their only relief from the flies and heat was found in their favourite mud wallows.
Mud, mud, glorious mud. Nothing quite like it for cooling the blood. So follow me, follow, down to the hollow, and there let us wallow in glorious mud.
By the early 1980s, there were more than 300,000 water buffalo in northern Australia, tens of thousands of them here in Kakadu National Park. It wasn't long before buffalo became part of the Territorian way of life. The big game hunters came to kill them for their hides, and later the tourists arrived to shoot them on film and take home the odd souvenir. Unfortunately, buffalo were a disaster for the top end, and especially national parks. Andrew Skeet deals with Kakadu's introduced nasties. Buffalo have been his biggest problem.
They're huge animals, and what we used to have up here was the largest animal was virtually a kangaroo, up to the size of my waist. And if you compare a buffalo hoof to a kangaroo's pad, you can imagine the difference it makes in terms of compacting the soil and digging up areas. And in addition, when you've got thousands of animals wandering over a floodplain, they're just going to eat. There were too many buffalo, and we just had miles and miles of bare dirt.
The nesting grounds for birds and crocodiles were destroyed, and the feed for many native animals disappeared. So when the park was declared in 1979, it was decided they had to go.
So the first thing to do was to employ people to come and catch them, because people eat them, they were used for hides, they always have been part of an industry up here. So the first set of buffalo was sold. After that, when it became too hard to catch them, unfortunately they've got to be shot. No one likes doing it, but it's just got to happen.
This is now happening throughout the Northern Territory because there's another serious problem with wild buffalo, and that's disease. Water buffalo are really just big cattle, and they can carry serious diseases like tuberculosis that can infect domestic cattle. So the government is trying to eradicate all wild buffalo. Andrew, is the shooting of buffalo a humane thing to do?
Well, of course it is, if it's done properly. Obviously, if you don't know what you're doing, then cruelty could arise, but that's something the Park Service is just determined to avoid.
All would-be buffalo shooters are trained and tested. They have to be able to shoot balloons from a helicopter to learn to kill on the first shot. They also practice shooting fixed targets as the helicopters always fly over twice to ensure no animal is left wounded. Although this may seem cruel, many people believe it's less stressful to the buffalo than the alternative of aerial roundups, which eventually end up at the abattoirs anyway. 2/3 of Kakadu will be buffalo-free by the end of this year. The floodplains have already come back to life. So very soon, those big horns that trophy hunters like to hang on their wall won't come from the wild, but from buffalo that are farmed just like cattle for their meat. But there's still a fair chance that you'll see some real little cuties like Jezebel here when you stay at your motel, or perhaps you'll see them on a buffalo farm. Well, this problem may have been solved in Kakadu, but Maxine's been checking out a much thornier problem that's, well, still posing quite a serious threat.
We're out in the wilds of Kakadu and we're hot on the trail of the Kakadu commandos who at this very moment are plotting their next raid on the dreaded mimosa.
You, Greg. I think you better head out to Dead Donkey today. Okay, Ollie, I want you to slip out the current corner and get stuck in that mosa. Get into it.
Luckily, these guys aren't as tough as they look. They said I could go with them if I help look for mimosa, which is some kind of nasty weed.
Hey, look out, mate.
Hang on, guys, I'm not the mimosa. I want to come with you.
Oh, okay, you can come with me. Come on, fellas, let's get going.
Flesh is weak for more.
Luckily, the tough guy who looks like Crocodile Dundee offers to carry me. His real name's Buck Saloo. He says there are leeches in this swamp, and if there's one thing I hate, it's leeches. Mimosa is really hard to find, but Buck can spot it from an incredibly long way off.
Hold on, what about me?
Oh, sorry.
You. Good. Now, you show me where it is.
Just
I
up here.
can't see it.
The plant that's got the slight bend to it.
Which one?
Up this way a bit. Here, this one here.
Ah! So this is mimosa.
Yeah, that's the plant we look for.
This is what all the trouble's been about.
That's right.
So you do this all the time, day in and day out?
Yeah, every day. We patrol areas. We've got about 50 lots of mimosa in Kakadu. And we just keep going back to them every 2 months and looking for plants like this.
So if you didn't do anything, what would happen?
Probably this plant here, 6 months' time, could have 50 plants around it, which just eventually just forms a big thicket.
What are you going to do with it now?
Oh, we'll rip him out and get rid of him. The trick is to go down so you don't get hooked by those prickles on it. That's it. Got it.
Right, so what do you do with it now?
I'll screw him up, put him in a bag, take him back and burn him.
Right. Well, what were all the knives and the machetes and the axes for?
Oh, well, just to look after, stop us getting attacked by crocodiles.
Okay, so what do we do? Go looking for more,
Yeah,
do we?
there's another one over there.
Where?
Get that one there. Over there.
It might be hard to spot mimosa in Kakadu, but outside the national park it's another story. 8,000 hectares of the Northern Territory are covered in it, and the trouble with mimosa is that it chokes everything, including the rivers and billabongs. Native plants can't compete with it, and that makes life hard for the birds and animals which depend on the plants. There's far too much of the horrible stuff to pull it out by hand, so scientists are experimenting with some tiny beetles which feed on mimosa. The beetles have already been released into this swamp, and Mark Lonsdale and his team have come to check their progress. The swamp's a nasty, leech-infested place as well, but I managed to hitch a ride again and find a perch out of the water. Colin wasn't so lucky.
Oh, hang on, I've got to get some of these leeches off.
Can you feel them?
Oh, yeah, they're pretty horrible.
Will it bleed?
It'll be bleeding for another couple of hours yet. The leeches inject an anticoagulant and it stops the blood from clotting. Oh. Yeah.
grab the tag. Here's the tag for plant number 7.
Height of number 1?
Height of number 1, 4.5 metres.
Mark and his
Okay,
team are
any
measuring the
practice?
mimosa plants to see if the beetles have had any effect. So, Mark, how well are the beetles doing?
They're persisting, but they're not really getting up into the kind of numbers that we'd hope to see.
It can be a pretty long process getting the right beetle, can't it?
Yes, it is, because we have to be very careful that we don't bring in some insect that's going to eat some native plant or crop plant.
Why do you think the mimosa's taken such a strong hold in here?
If you go back to the mid-70s, these floodplains were, we think, massively overgrazed by the buffalo, and they created nice soil conditions, bare soil conditions for the mimosas to get going. And heavy floodwaters in the mid-70s took the seed of mimosa right across those floodplains, and now you see these vast expanses of mimosa that are around us today.
This place is revolting. There are leeches, mosquitoes, it's wet, it's hot. It's just the worst place you'd want to be. Let's hope they solve the mimosa problem soon. Can we get out of here?
You've earned a dip.
Oh, that was lovely.
Very difficult story to do.
The mimosa?
Absolutely.
Very trying conditions.
Yeah, I guess the real problem for mimosa is that the park's a single catchment area, so that if the seeds get loose in the park, they're distributed right across the area every time it plays flood. Yeah, and the same thing applies to buffalo, other animals like that. So you've got to constantly watch the place because it's being encroached from outside the whole time.
Well, that's right, and of course then there's uranium mining because there are leases right in the middle and completely surrounded by the park.
I mean, the mines are outside the park, and of course if there's any byproducts or pollutants coming from those mines, they'll be into the park, you know, in a flash, really.
And we don't know the long-term effects of mining. We do know it doesn't look really good.
Yeah.
And then it needs a hell of a lot of people to support it. You need transport, shops, accommodation.
Yeah, but there's another big pressure on Kakadu, and that's tourists. This year there'll be over 200,000 of them.
Well, that's right. We're here in the wet season, so there aren't too many tourists about, but in the dry season, the place would be packed. This pool would be teeming with people.
The real problem, I guess, is that it's such a vast park. It's 12,000 square kilometres, and that's just huge. So the rangers have a terrible time just getting around here. There's very few of them for a start.
I wonder how they manage it.
Well, I'm going to go and have a chat to Greg and just see what the life of a ranger is really all about.
You do that. I'll stay here in the pool.
Okay. You've earned it.
Thank you.
There are 6 ranger stations in Kakadu, and Greg's in charge of South Alligator. There might not be any alligators in his household, but there are plenty of other mouths to feed. Even the garden gnomes have that lean and hungry look.
A lot of people have garden gnomes, you know, but our problem is we have to feed these.
These are pretty fancy garden gnomes. Where did they come from, Greg?
Well, these were young birds which are starving at the end of last nesting season. And we found them wandering along the highway, but steady. Wait your turn. You've had one. No. They're a problem.
Yeah,
they're really. Did you bring a Band-Aid?
They're also well armed.
In a true natural situation, they would have died. And you know, the question could be asked, should we be interfering with the animals in keeping them alive? Well, in this particular case, we're planning to reintroduce them to the wild, and so far it's working quite well.
Greg's gnomes are really young jabberoos, Australia's only stork. Normally, they'd be looked after by the parents in those big, messy nests that jabberoos build in trees. But these birds must be taught to fend for themselves. Soon they'll grow their black and white adult feathers and be able to leave the ranger station for good. First, they have to learn to catch what jabberoos normally eat in the wild.
It was killed on the road, this snake. So I thought, why waste it?
Jabberoo was terrified of the snake. Never seen one before.
But the problem he has here is that there's no head on the snake along its body. He's feeling it to and fro to try and find a head because he's used to eating fish which have the hard head. And when they feel that, then they can swallow it head first. So he's going to be playing with that for quite a while, I think.
Let's get grasshoppers, he's hungry. Come on, Greg.
Clearly, Jabberoos aren't the only ones with strange tastes of South alligator.
More grasshoppers.
Hi, Kalia.
No, hi.
What have you got here?
A festigale. A bush-tailed festigale.
What are you doing with the grasshoppers?
Feeding them to him. It's very tasty to him.
Does he have a name?
Poor thing. There's this other festigale called Fatso, and he's a boss. He's really bossy, and he fights with poor thing, and that's why his ears are all tatty.
Most animals in Kakadu sleep through the heat of the day. But poor thing thinks a hand-fed grasshopper is well worth waking up for. Meanwhile, Bunich is feeding pressed chicken to his very strange pig-nosed turtles. But today is a sad day.
Well, today's the day, Bunich. We're going to take them out and let them go. You want to put them in the esky?
Yes.
Okay.
Daddy, you have to let them go.
Well, if we let them go in the wild, they'll be able to lay eggs and make more pig-nosed turtles. There we are.
Greg's been involved in research on the turtles since they hatched.
Okay.
Today he's doing an aerial survey up near the waterfalls, the homeland of pig-nosed turtles. Aerial surveys are made regularly in Kakadu to check if numbers of animals such as crocodiles and buffalo are increasing. But rangers don't spend all their time flying around in helicopters.
Well, it's one of the more romantic things that we do, I suppose, but a lot of the rangers' work is involved with much more uninteresting things like collection and disposal of rubbish. There's so much rubbish built up here in the dry season, it's unbelievable. And cleaning out pit toilets, who can imagine anything much worse than that? But that's also a ranger's job just as much as it is flying around in helicopters counting crocodile nests. You take the good with the bad.
You certainly can't beat releasing pig-nosed turtles at the foot of the magnificent Twin Falls.
This is a pretty exciting moment. Well, I think the turtles are probably happier about it than us, actually.
White scientists only discovered pig-nosed turtles in Australia in 1968, and they were surprised to find that they weren't the first to discover them.
And what happened is then we started looking at the Aboriginal paintings in a different light. And what we thought were regular turtles, after finding the live thing, we could see now were not regular turtles at all. They were, in fact, these little fellas.
I guess the thing to pick is this funny little snorkel-type nose that they've got at the
Well,
front here.
yes, they've got this head and neck arrangement which actually retracts directly into the shell in a straight line, whereas all the other Australian turtles retract their neck sideways into the shell.
OK, guys, let's go. Let's give them a launch into life.
Indeed. Here we go. Look at the smiles.
Yeah. How big will they be when they finally grow up?
Well, they grow into monsters by Australian standards. They'll have a shell length like that, and it takes 2 hands to lift them. They're quite hefty.
I've heard that the eggs all hatch simultaneously when they get wet. Is that true?
That's right. The eggs are laid in the big white sandbanks, and when the big rains come, the waters rise, they come up to the level of the eggs in the sandbanks, and presto, out they all pop. They can then disperse with the new water of the wet season, and it increases their chances of survival.
Well, they look pretty happy.
I'd say they will be. Yes, they've got the right spot.
They're in the best place.
I am so hot. But that's it for Kakadu. Let's go for a swim.
Let's have a final swim.
No, wait a minute.
Great.
Wait a minute. There could well be crocodiles in here. You never can tell.
Oh, dear.
Oh, no. So what do we do?
Yeah, it's right, actually.
Well,
What's the choice?
One thing we can do.
Hey, no! I'm going for a swim at the
Hey, wait a minute. Hey, come back here. It's great. No, seriously, it's terrific.
Hey!